Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. At long last, the time has come. This week, I'll be welcoming none other than writer JEPH LOEB to the podcast. JEPH, of course, has had a tremendous career across film, television, and comics. On the Superman front, he wrote the seminal 1998 miniseries For All Seasons, with art by the late, great Tim Sale. He went on to write the ongoing Superman title for 3 years with artist Ed McGuinness. This was during the famed Loeb-Kelly era of the early 2000s, and included such storylines as Y2K, Critical Condition, Emperor Joker, Our Worlds at War, and more. He then launched the ongoing Superman-Batman title and wrote the first 4 story arcs, including Public Enemies and Supergirl. On top of all that, he was a consulting and then supervising producer on Smallville during seasons 2 through 4, penning the episodes Red, Insurgents, Legacy, and Unsafe. We've been talking about JEPH's work since the very beginning of this podcast. And in fact, earlier this year, we revisited the Loeb-Kelly era over multiple episodes. And I even had the opportunity to interview Joe Kelly. I wasn't quite sure if I'd ever get the chance to speak with JEPH himself, as interviews with him can be a bit rare. But here we are. To those of you who listen regularly, you guys know what a big deal this is for the podcast and for me personally, and I'm honored to have you along for this ride. And to those of you who are new to Digging for Kryptonite, welcome, thank you for joining us, and I hope that you'll subscribe and check out our back catalog. I was fortunate enough to get about an hour with JEPH. There's a point in the episode where it seems like he only has a few minutes left, but worry not and don't hit stop. He ends up sticking around for a good bit past that point, and I'm very appreciative to him for his time. And now we're going to take one commercial break, and then my interview with JEPH LOEB will play uninterrupted. I hope you enjoy. My love of the TV series Smallville is well documented, and there's one rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue. Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring great insight, passion, and humor to each and every episode. And the podcast continues with more great Smallville and Superman talk now that their series rewatch has concluded. Listen wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On To banner, including Arrow, Star Wars, and more. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations, Harrison, New York, Muncie, Indiana, or Skokie, Illinois, home to our pal, Sweet Sweet Bernie. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow them on social media. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw yeah! We all love the big-budget superhero films, but the world of independent cinema remains a place of unbridled creative freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. Whether you're an independent filmmaker yourself, or you just love movies, don't miss these New Jersey film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, and Round Reel in Bloomfield. Submission information for filmmakers can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and much more. Fat Moose Comics, established in 1982, is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Led by current owner Sean Hendricks, Moose has that rare, old-school comic shop feel and camaraderie, yet also remains a welcoming space for new fans. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you are in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. As a Superman fan, have you ever wondered what would happen if a person who knew barely anything about comics decided to absorb hundreds of Superman stories from all eras and media? Robbo is that kind of person, and that's exactly what he's done on a new show called This Podcast Will Never Die. The first season, called Superman Will Never Die, starts with the unexpected ways the Man of Steel stood out from the pulp heroes on the newsstands in 1938. Listen and subscribe to This Podcast Will Never Die, and you'll never look at Superman's trunks the same way again. We love digging into epic comic book runs, but what about the art of the single issue? Single Bound is a new podcast series hosted by married couple Amy and Logan as they review single issues of comics. And if the title also makes you think of Superman, you're not alone, as the Man of Steel is Logan's favorite character and a regular topic of discussion on Single Bound. Listen and subscribe on Spotify and YouTube, and follow the show on Instagram at SingleBound Podcast. JEPH Loeb, welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, sir. It's an absolute honor to have you here.
Thank you. The honor's mine. I say this all the time, which is this is a partnership. I cannot do what I do without my fans and readers enjoying what I've done, and that enables me to continue to tell stories when I want to. Because believe me, the big two, as much as I adore them and I adore the characters, they'd be more than happy to throw me down a flight of stairs. I've been there a long time, and I'm now making this up, but if you don't sell books, you don't get to cooks. And I've just been very lucky that, and I 100% give credit to my artists. This is a visual medium. I could tell the most beautiful, well-written script. But unless I had someone like Tim Sale or Jim Lee or Michael Turner or Ed McGuinness, the list goes on and on, Arthur Adams. Everybody I've ever worked with, actually. I look for people specifically who can elevate my script and who can take what it is that I've written and make it feel more like a movie, which is what I'm writing. I do write very specific, and I do write full script. Not quite Alan Moore, 2 pages to describe a desk. But I will describe angles and shots and size of panels and things like that. But mostly in order for the artist to have something to work from. I write the same letter to every artist, which is, this is a blueprint. And if you feel like there's a cooler way to do it, let's do the cool.
Well, one of the things you are certainly known for is writing for your artists. And on the note of Ed McGuinness specifically, I was really reflecting on this at the time as a 12, 13, 14-year-old reading your issues with Ed for the first time. Even though I had been reading the Superman books for years prior to that, I don't think I was consciously aware of what a departure his art style was. All I knew was that I loved it. And to this day, if I close my eyes and picture Superman on the comic book page, 9 times out of 10, I'm picturing the art of Ed McGuinness.
Well, I'm sure Ed would be incredibly flattered by that, since he constantly says things like, nobody cares what I do. In his Boston accent. But no, that was a conscious change. I mean, DC really came to us for a long, long time. I mean, there were sort of 2 people who defined, 3 if you count the years that John Byrne was there. But in terms of just long breaths of time, and I'm sure there are people out there who will disagree with me, and that's fine. But for a long time, it was Kurt Swan, and people tended to ape that kind of style. That was the house style of the time. It was very clean, very bright. And so it was not surprising when Jose Garcia Lopez became sort of the new look, because it was more defined and more angular, and Superman looked a little bit more robust. He certainly looked more dense than he did when Kurt drew him. And again, love them both. But then you're sort of getting into like the Dan Jurgens era, and again, those looks for me came from Jose Garcia Lopez, and really at the time, because I went through this with Tim, because when we did Superman for All Seasons, Tim's look of what Superman looked like was such a departure from what Dan Jurgens was doing at the time that they literally sent Tim like a sketch style book of like, this is what he looks like, and this is what we'd like you to do. And Tim was very polite and said, yeah, then you don't want me because I can't draw like that. So by the time Ed came on, uh, again, I have to give credit where credit's due. Like, Eddie Berganza had taken over the books and really wanted to shake things up. And it wasn't just our guys. If you look at, because that book was essentially a weekly book, between Action and Adventures and Man of Steel. Doug Mahnke didn't come from that group, and Como didn't come from that group, and uh, you know, we really sort of set a new standard, which was it's not going to look like your dad's Superman. It's going to look like the artist that's on this book. So that when Ed came on, uh, they sort of knew what he was going to look like. He'd been on Majestic, which was sort of Wildstorm's version of Superman. Um, but it was the book between Superman and the Hulk, those were the two things that he really wanted to draw. And then Spidey, and that's where he's been forever. And I keep trying to break him out, and he's just like, no, I really like drawing Spider-Man.
Well, the thing with Ed is that obviously we know he can do that big bombastic muscular action, and it's a ton of fun and magnificent. But I feel like his secret weapon is the emotional side of things, because there were moments in your run in particular where Parasite is impersonating Lois, and Lois and Clark's marriage appears to be on the rocks, and Clark is really getting put through the emotional ringer. The end of Our World's at War, when Superman is standing there at the remains of the farm, and he just knocked it out of the park. So I feel like, yes, there's the action side of things, but really nailed the emotional beats as well. And I guess the question that I had for you was, what were the things that he was most interested in drawing, that either he would ask for or that you knew if you put in a script, like, oh, he's really going to gravitate towards this?
I Ed's, sort of godfather is Jack Kirby. There was the I what I always loved about Jack's work was that it was too big to fill the panel. So it really felt like his characters were leaping out of the page at you. And that if you didn't look out, you were going to get punched in the face too. And I love that. I particularly loved that as a kid. I mean, the Fantastic Four was my book. Ed is from that same school. And so what I would try to do was limit the number of panels on a page, a lot of double page spreads, uh, so that he could really flex that muscle, which was to show the big pow. Yes, he could do the quiet moments too, but I think part of the reason why they are as impactful as they are is that oftentimes we always went big, so that if we suddenly went small, it was like a full orchestra playing, and then all of a sudden a little piccolo would come out at the end. Um, and I do think of when I write, I do think in very musical terms, in addition to film. And so it is important to watch how the story's flowing. It can't all be bombastic, or else it's just noise. But we didn't talk a lot, particularly in those days, um, about uh, what we were going to do. We got more into that when we were on Superman Batman, because we had already worked together for 3 years. And so uh, now we had very much of a shorthand. So I would do things like, what is it that you want to do? But Ed's, what is it that you want to do is not what most of my artists would talk about. Like when I would talk to Tim would say, I would do something noir and something with a lot of shadows. And it'd be great if we did like a mystery, and that kind of thing excites me. With Ed, it was be like, I want to draw Luthor in the green and purple suit. I want to draw Spider-Man in the black outfit. And again, very lucky, because the editors that we worked with would generally say, yeah, that's cool, go ahead. Yeah. But that was the other thing, was when we took over Superman, and I've told the story before, and this is, again, it is in no way a dig on anybody that worked before us. I had just felt like we had had a perfect apple tree. It was American, and with no political aspirations. It was just, no matter what anybody says, it is the immigrant story. It is the story about a man who comes from another place in order to show us the best that we could be. And that to me is an apple tree. It's like there's a bright red apple against a green background. It could be blue for all I care. And it's strong like an oak, and it's there. And it's like, as soon as you look at it, you recognize it. And then as time went by, and I think it's exciting when people bring in change, but when you were doing Superman Blue and Superman Red, and you were doing Superman in the black costume, and then there was a whole period where there was Cyborg Superman and there was Superboy, and again, all that stuff sold a lot of books and made a lot of excitement. But when I was handed the book, the Daily Planet was closed. Clark was home working on a novel, and I came on the book and I said to DC, I said, look, if I'm coming back, which is why the first issue that I did is called We're Back, was because I wanted to start with Superman picking up the Daily Planet, which the Globe, this iconic thing, almost as much as the S. And it was in a junkyard. And I just was like, that's kind of a comment on the book. And I don't want that to be that way. And it was funny because they asked us to come to New York, and they got us behind the scenes at either the Daily News or the New York Post. But when you're walking through the hallways, and there are these big, huge, giant, like what's called a 6-sheet poster of the different headlines, I just took that from the hallway that's in, I think, at the Daily News. It could be at the New York Post. And it just sort of tried to get it back into Clark Kent is a reporter for a great metropolitan newspaper. The idea was to do exactly what we did. And I was amazed by people's reaction. Like, they were like, your take on Superman is so unique. And I was like, no, it's not. It just isn't what anyone's been doing. I just wanted to go back to sort of basic. I wanted to go back to the apple tree.
Yeah.
But I think the only reason why, and I felt this at the time, and I don't think I could ever do it again, was that because I was the new kid, and because I was the guy who had, quote, come from Marvel, everyone thought that I was going to break the marriage. So that when Lois started acting completely out of character and kicked basically Clark out, everyone was like, and again, there was no internet at the time, so there was no one to know what was going to happen next month. You had to just wait for the book to come out. And so I got away with it largely because people didn't know that I wasn't going to do that. They didn't know 6 months from now, because they've already seen the cover, that Lois and Clark were still married. They thought, okay, so that when it turned out to be the parasite, who, by the way, never had the ability to change shape, and I'm not sure he's ever changed shape since, I got away with it. And it sort of said to the reader coming out of the gate, this is our first story. Just stay with us. We're going to do a lot of classic characters and a lot of classic stories, but we're going to surprise you. Like, I don't think anybody, when I came up with the idea that Luthor runs for president, DC just said two things. One, he has to win or they're stupid. And two, you have to find out how to get him out, because we can't leave him there. And you can't say, well, that's somebody else's problem. Um, and both those things we had worked out at the beginning. And it was just a question of how long was he going to stay in office and how many stories could come out of that. And then the fact that it sort of turned into real life was a little frightening. And the only change that they made us change was uh, at the very end of uh, the
Public Enemies.
first, yeah, Public Enemies, when Luther's in the sewer and completely defeated, and the towers have come down and all that stuff. And I hated the towers came down, and then the towers really came down. Like all that stuff is just creepy and eerie. And when he's looking up, and I specifically said to Ed, I want to do that shot that John Byrne did of Wolverine in the sewer. And it's like this classic, iconic thing. I said, that's what I want Lex to look like. Uh, and I and the balloon, and it's I have the original page. So the balloon originally said Clark Kent is Superman. He remembered, and because I think it's good when there's that kind of significant change.
Me too.
And instead, he comes out of the sewer and he says, "There'll be a crisis." And I was like, I don't even know what that means, but that's the line they gave me. And the book was shipping, and I just couldn't fight the fight. Um, but I do think it's much more interesting. It's why I did it with the Riddler. Was that I think it elevates the villain to a place where he's not going to share it. He's not going to put it up on Times Square, Clark Kent and Superman. I didn't understand when someone found out Spider-Man's secret identity that they were going to tell everybody that he was Peter Parker. Like, who cares? Like, it doesn't. It's only a secret is only as good as long as you can keep it. And once two people know it, that's a secret. Once you get to three people, it's not a secret anymore. And it just becomes a joke. It just becomes, okay, well then Clark Kent Superman. So what?
Yeah, I've always felt the same way. And I did love in the Vengeance arc that you did on, or with the Vengeance of Superman Batman, your final arc on the title, that you showed the original version of that panel and then how reality had been rewritten. So I'm glad that you ultimately got that in there. One of the big questions I had for you, because I love the entire President Lex storyline. And one of the things I was curious about, it was interesting rereading all of that material a couple of times over recent years. And my takeaway, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast. Lex is not a saint, but a surprisingly competent president, more so than you might expect. But then he has this very deranged turn in Public Enemies, and he's taking the concoction of kryptonite and venom and donning that war suit. And I was curious what your perspective was on that shift. Was it just that he was pushing down those darker, more villainous urges for so long, and eventually it just bubbled up and it led to what we got in Public Enemies?
Well, the short answer is yes. But I think what we wanted to do in Public Enemies was that, first of all, we knew he was leaving office, and I didn't want him leaving office in a suit. I wanted there to be like a climactic battle, and I just sort of thought, if you're gonna build a supervillain, at some point he's got to throw down. Um, and that's why I'm really curious about the announcement that Man of Tomorrow, and that he's standing there in the green suit. I'm like, okay, we're gonna go there. And I would sort of think that for a guy that was wearing, Hugo Boss and Armani for an entire movie, and then the dog throws him around like the Hulk throws Loki around. It's sort of pretty close to comedy, but at the same time, if a super dog was actually throwing you around in the room, you probably break some bones and things like that. That I think he'd come out of that going, yeah, that's not going to happen again. I'm not. This is me taking it to the mat, and I want to take him down. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I have to say, as someone who grew up with the post-crisis evil businessman version of Lex. Nevertheless, there was something viscerally satisfying in Public Enemies when you saw him get in that suit and throw down and have that kind of confrontation. I want to circle back to something because one of the things that I certainly consider a staple of your Superman writing is your use of supporting characters to narrate the proceedings. We saw that certainly in For All Seasons with Pa and Lois and Lex and Lana. And then
But you know the story of For All Seasons and
yes,
how that
that was not originally the intention, right? But you had written the script for issue 1 and felt like you needed something, but you didn't want to get inside Clark's head because he was too iconic, and you landed on Pa.
you pretty much summed it up. The one thing that had happened was Richard Starkings, who should always be applauded for anything I do, because those words on those pages and where they are and how what font is used and what the balloon looks like and all those things, which really does affect the read in the same kind of way that a voice can affect the way, certainly in animation and very much when you're watching somebody on screen. Richard sent me what I'd written. Basically what happens is there's a full script. I get all of the artwork, generally in the pencils, so there's enough time for us to work on it. I then do the placements and I go through the dialogue, and sometimes I've written something later on that I realized I put in the first issue and I got to take that out, and it's a quick polish is what I would say. And I read this 48-page first issue, and it takes about 3 minutes to read. Artwork's gorgeous, but unless you're sitting there looking at the pictures, then I don't know what to do. And at the time, that book was going out at $4.95, and that was not normal. The regular books were $1.99, and I was like, I can't ask the reader to have a 2-minute experience with me. So I called Richard and I said to him, look, I don't know what to do. And he said, well, do you want to put in narration? You do that a lot in the Batman work. And I said, just as you had said, I said, yeah, but I don't want Clark to narrate. We would do that on Superman Batman only because it was a counterpoint to what Batman was talking about. So it was a lot of fun doing that. And he said, well, who is really the core of this character in this story? And I said, it's Jonathan, it's Pa. And he said, well, then pick a page and see what it is. And so it's the page where Ma is standing on the porch, Martha, and there's a screen door there. And then sort of in the distance, you can see Clark and Pa talking. And it's the day that he basically says he has to go away. And there wasn't anything on the page. It was just, I just sort of wanted it to feel like you'll find out on the spread, which is coming up. But I was now a father and wanted to sort of talk about what that feels like. That if you do your job properly, you've taught your child how to leave and be on their own, which is both incredibly rewarding and incredibly heartbreaking at the same time. So I wrote that one page and he lettered it, and I looked at it and I went, this could work. I said, and then we're left with a giant problem, which is Jonathan's not in the rest of the story, and I can't have Jonathan telling a story that he's not there for. And so it suddenly became, it then became Lois and Lex. Had a lot of fun doing Lex. But all of that was an afterthought. The last chapter, Lana, is the only script that I wrote with narration in the original script. So that Tim knew, okay, there's going to be 4 boxes in this panel. I don't need to draw every leaf on every tree. He's going to cover that up. But I think that's part of the reason why the artwork is so beautiful particularly in the first issue, aside from Jonah Hanson's just extraordinary watercolor work. was that Tim was allowed to have all this space because he didn't know there were going to be all these boxes that was suddenly covering up part of his artwork. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that that narration in For All Seasons and your 3-year run on the Superman title, I think that's a big part of the reason why those issues resonated so much and have stuck with me for so long. And I've talked about this a lot on the podcast. This is less of a question and I suppose just more of a compliment. I feel like it's this writing magic trick where I feel like the narration has this dual effect. On the one hand, having all of these supporting cast members comment on Clark mythologizes him, to have that commentary about him, makes him feel larger than life, yet at the same time humanizes him because you're getting this insight behind and beyond the icon. And those things are pointing in different directions, but it amazingly works so well and achieves such a balance. And like I said, I think that's a huge part of why those stories resonated so much. And I was just curious, especially by the time you get to the Superman run, primarily you used Lois, but we also had issues narrated by Perry, Jimmy, Ma, Pa, Emil Hamilton, Kyle Rayner, even Clark himself in an instance via a letter that he wrote. And I was wondering, were there any characters you were particularly, quote unquote, surprised by? Maybe you had selected them to be the narrator, and then as you got into it deeper and actually started writing from their perspective, maybe there was some other angle or perspective that came to mind that you hadn't initially planned on?
I mean, for me, the challenge of doing the narration is, and I groan when I'll go back and I'll look at something and I'll go, it's the worst, is when the narration explains what's in the picture. Like a lot of narration, and I'm guilty of doing it with Batman. Like sometimes, like Batman will say things like lights out, have to change plan. Okay, well, we can see the lights are out and we can see that. So I'd rather, one of my favorite things is when he, at the end of the Long Halloween, and he has to go up against all of the villains inside the Roman's penthouse. He tells a story about seeing his father operate as a surgeon. And what I always try to do is to find a story that's not the story that you're looking at on the page, but it comments on it in another way. And that's not always easy. I mean, sometimes you really do have to stop and say, we're in the Batcave. This is Robin. Robin doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And that's what we're going to do. When you get a third party commenting on it, the real challenge isn't so much the voice as much as, okay, how does Lois know that in this scene? That's where I stumble. Like I'll stop and I'll go, okay, we're now in a secret hideout, and Lex is going into a vault and bringing out a big chunk of kryptonite, and Lois is talking about when she first met Lex and who he was, and I'm thinking to myself, does this imply that she knows what's happening in the scene, or is this just the writer going, okay, here's a little story I'm going to put over the scene so that it does exactly what you're talking. I love when you went this way. That it's just the challenge. The worst is once I start it, I can't undo it. Like that's what it was, and that, bless him, Archie Goodwin taught me, which was when I started on Batman. I turned in my first Batman story, which was the first Long Halloween special, the first Halloween special. Had the longest title I think of any comic. It was the Legends of the Dark Knight Halloween special #1. It was like this long convoluted thing, and I turned it in, and Archie called me and said, "Where's the narration?" And I went, "What narration?" Because there was no narration in Challenge of the Unknown. I just wrote a comic book. He said, "Well, in other Batman books, they don't, but in Legends of the Dark Knight, we do narration." And I was like, oh. Okay, now I have to figure out how not to do. Wow, that's a very high wall. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get over that high wall. I mean, there are times once you abandon the thought balloon, which I'm very happy that we've abandoned the thought balloon. Although every now and then I'll see somebody using it going, that's kind of cool that you used it there, but narration replaced that. It gave you a thought balloon without it being there. So it was fun when you'd have a character that wasn't necessarily the lead narrating because it wasn't his thoughts, but they were commenting on what was going on. So, and going all the way back to Superman for All Seasons, that him talking about remembering Clark as a baby was telling the story of what was going on in that field without Jonathan ever saying, Clark, I remember when you were a child. I know some writers who would have done that story. I decided to do a story when they were just looking at the sunset and Clark says, will you ever get tired of looking at that? And he says, no, I won't. I guess I never will, which for me was just a way of a father saying, I will always love you.
Yes. I don't mean to jump in, but I know you have a hard out in about 3 minutes. So
Yeah,
do you mind if we just do a quick lightning round with some of the other
sure.
quick
And I'll
questions
do
that I
my
had?
best to remember.
The character Ignition introduced during Emperor Joker, was there a long-term plan for him and his
Yes,
origin?
huge. We wanted a character that could come in and uh, he was sort of our version of Holocaust from the X-Men Age of Apocalypse. Um, and when we left, he kind of went away. A lot of those characters, Scorch, I really wanted to bring a version of Terra Man back. And I mean, there were so many things that we got lucky with. We got to bring back Crypto, who didn't exist after John Byrne. And then he's running around in the movie. And I'm like, this is awesome. And then also, I wanted to do Crypto as he is in the movie, which is Crypto always had thought balloons, and he would go, "Yes, master, I'll be right there." And I thought, what if he's just a dog with superpowers and he can tear off an oven and eat the turkey dinner, and Lois can be angry at him? Like, can we do that? That sounds like more fun. So when suddenly he was running around in the movie as like bad dog, I was like, this is awesome. And then the other thing was that when I got handed Supergirl, she was an ectoplasmic being from another parallel dimension who had merged with an angel. And I went, no, she's a 17-year-old girl who comes from the planet Krypton and who's actually stronger than Clark and knows more about Krypton than he does.
On the note of Krypton, the return to Krypton storyline, where we find out that the memories and the imagery of the Byrne version of Krypton were these false implants, and that the true Krypton was much closer to the Silver Age version. By the time we got to Return to Krypton 2, right after you had left the books, it turned out it was all a plot by Brainiac 13. But at the time of the initial Return to Krypton miniseries, was the intention that the true version of Krypton was indeed that more Silver Age-esque iteration?
Absolutely. I think people forget that I don't own Superman. I don't own any of the characters. Even when I'm working in Marvel, I don't own any of those characters. So if I tell a story, it goes through. You can't know how many channels you have to go through, particularly now that there's movies and television shows, and this is what you want to do. I personally think that like you could never kill Alfred, like ever now, but they did, and now they're sort of stuck with it because they don't know what to do and how to get out of it. So now he's an AI guy running around. Like, to me, you need, whenever you bring that stuff to upper management, they just have two questions, which is how are you going to do it and how are you going to undo it in case we need to undo it. But I'm always surprised and then not surprised when we go through all the trouble of saying this is what Krypton is, and then we all leave the book, and 6 months later they go, "Yeah, we're not doing that. We want to go back to what it was." And I go, "Okay, great, it's fine." It's when I find out that someone who's dead, like really dead, is now suddenly running around. And then I go, I don't understand. I'm playing by your rules. I had to get permission to kill this person. It doesn't look like the person who came after me is respecting any of that, even though I'm doing my best to respect the work that comes before me. Like when I killed Carmine Falcone, I went to Frank Miller and said, "Are you okay with this? It's your character. I don't want him to take 2 bullets in the." He was like, "Go ahead, do whatever you want." I don't know that I answered your question, but yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's not a lightning round, but it's
no,
okay.
it's all right. I know I have to cut you loose, but obviously, as of
No,
this
keep going. I'll give you. Let's keep playing. This is fun.
all right. No, I appreciate that. Well, we mentioned the movie a couple of times, so a big part of it certainly was the revelation about the message from Jor-El and Lara in the film. And I want to jump to really quickly.
Don't believe it for a second. I just don't. I'm in that. James Gunn can tell me tomorrow morning that it's real. There's no way that the engineer, who's one of the bad guys, who clearly can stick her fingers into anything and make anything into anything, and Lex Luthor, who goes out and shows it to the world and says, "This is the truth," that I'm sitting in the audience going, "Oh yeah, this is the truth." In a world of AI, like you can't believe any news story. But that absolutely was James's way of saying to the audience, "You're going to have to decide whether or not that's a true story or not." But the truth of the matter is, it's not important whether or not it's true. What's important is how quickly everybody turned on it.
Yes. And the reason why I'm particularly happy to have you here is, of course, you were a consulting and then supervising producer on Smallville for seasons 2 through 4. And my goodness, I could ask you a million questions about Smallville. But during season 2, the seminal episode Rosetta, it delved into very similar territory where Clark is able to access this message from Jor-El through the ship. And it includes this language about ruling them with strength. And by the time we got to the beginning of season 10, Jor-El referenced that again, but I don't know that we ever got a totally satisfactory accounting of that. And I know by that point you had long left the show. My question though, during season 2, especially during the writing and breaking of Rosetta, what was the discussion around that message? Was there a long-term plan in place, or was it more right now this is about creating tension between Clark and the Kryptonian heritage?
Again, you have to remember, this is as much as I learned on that show and as much fun as I had and as much inspiration that was taken from my work on that show. And it's Al Goff and Miles Miller's show.
Sure.
Their decisions to do things. I mean, sometimes they would come to me and go, "Has this been done? Are we going to get in trouble if we do this?" And then I would talk to DC. I was the guy because they would sort of go, "Send the comic book guy in and see what happens." To my memory, and you'd need Alan Miles to say this. To my memory, it was to create tension and to let the audience wonder. I think exactly what James did is exactly what's happening. I just if Superman himself had fixed it and was sitting by himself and went, "Oh my God, this is what they meant," I would say, okay, James is changing lore. But because of where it came from and how it was obtained, don't buy it. Don't buy it. Don't buy it. But what's kind of great is, doesn't matter whether or not you buy it or you don't buy it. Like, Jor-El and Lara are not going to be in the movie. They're gone. And to have him at the end embrace the Smallville aspects of his life and Jonathan and Martha and realize that's who makes me human, that's a much better story. And you can't get to that story without throwing a little tar at Krypton. It's the way it worked. And I think it worked for the audience big time. Yeah, it gave us geeks something to argue about until we see the next movie. And look, I have total respect for James, but I've seen him play this game so well that he'll come out and absolutely not 1000%. You can't, and then oops, yeah, well, I had a different idea.
No, fair enough. Not too long ago, I really enjoyed watching you reconnect with Tom and Michael on the Talkville podcast when they covered the
Had a
episode
blast. I
Red.
would do anything for those guys.
And certainly Red is a favorite of mine. I have to say, though, of the quartet of episodes that you're credited as writing during your time with Smallville, Insurgents remains my number one. Such a standout. To this day, Lex's line to Jonathan about how all Jonathan's done is give him sanctimonious platitudes. Sanctimonious platitudes cemented in my brain forever.
Yeah. And, again, my pitch for that episode was, I want to do Die Hard with Superman. And everyone went, okay. And where are you going to set it? There's only one place to set it. Set it at LuthCorp, or LexCorp, or whatever it's called then. And, we just had fun. It's my memory of that show is all good. It's like every episode was, we were writing Superman. And I remember Mark Verheiden was kind of my mentor on that show, and he had been there long enough to be able to do that. And I remember him saying to me, we get to write Lex and Clark. Like, there's not a better job. And when he left after season 3. And he looked at me and he said, I've written 66, or I was part of 66 episodes. I can't write Lex and Clark anymore. I just can't. And I remember when I got to the end of the 4th season, and at that point I had done my 66, probably more. I remember having the same feeling, like this is as good as it's going to get. And the writers who had started as lower writers and went on to become executive producers, like Todd and Kelly, and Darren, that they were great, and they were, it was easy to hand it off. It wasn't like I felt like I was abandoning the ship. And there some shows where I've abandoned the ship, and you can probably guess which one that is. But for the most part, it was just an extraordinary experience with an exceptional cast. There's not a bad piece of casting on that show.
Agreed. No, and kind of on this note of works of yours, lines, moments that are forever seared into my brain. One of the things that I really loved during your Superman run was what I perceived to be this cross-pollination with the Bat books. I mean, right after City of Tomorrow, for example, there were references to how Lex had inserted himself into Gotham City at the end of No Man's Land, and then was able to parlay his work in Gotham and Metropolis to the presidency. Talia would take over LexCorp when Lex would become president. Bruce Wayne turned out to be the mystery owner of the Daily Planet. I love that cross-pollination. And then jumping over to Hush, there's that great moment where Bruce is in the Daily Planet, and through his narration, he's talking about how Perry White is too good of a reporter to not know that Clark is Superman. And he's like, and I think the same thing about Jim Gordon. And that has forever been the way I look at Gordon, yes, but even more so Perry White, that in my headcanon, and I know stories don't explicitly address that, but in my headcanon, it's like, yes, he knows. He just doesn't say anything, but he has to know. But I love that.
I agree. I completely agree. And I wrote it. So it's so funny that you reference that moment in Hush, because when I turned it in, and they at that point they very rarely gave me notes, and I really appreciated it. But in that moment, they said, "Look, we have to explain why Bruce is there." And I said, "Well, he's there to see Clark." And so there's this line about how, can't the owner of the Daily Planet, come and see how his investment is again, or something like that. And every time Like I'm reading along, going, "This, oh yeah, what Jim's art is amazing, we're fun, okay, it's great." And suddenly I go, "Wait, what? He was the he owned the planet? Like when did that? Oh, I did that. Oh, and I and now I'm quoting that, like, and it's one of the things that I constantly battle the continuity demons, which is, look, guys, they're just stories, and like if you're going to tell me it's okay that the Riddler forgot that Bruce Wayne and Batman were the same, then you know what? When I come back, he remembers, and not only does he remember, he knows who Dick is. He knows who they all are. And no, I'm not going to explain it. You let somebody else either erase it or spend some time talking about how smart this man is. And it's just one of the things that you get to do.
On the note of Hush, as of this recording, you've returned to the Hush saga, the Long Halloween saga for its final chapter. I mean, I have to ask, do you foresee any return to Superman in your future?
I'd need Ed. That's the problem. I can do guest starring things, and because obviously, if Jim's drawing it, you want to see that moment. Um, uh, it was not something that Tim was ever really comfortable with. Tim would sort of look at, even though he was a Marvel kid and they crossed all the time, and he loved, like in Daredevil Yellow, when the Fantastic Four came over and suddenly crashed through the window at Matt Murdock's place. Like he loved drawing. But when I would say to him, "So Superman's going to be in this issue," he'd go, "No, he's not. I'm not drawing Superman in this issue." And it had nothing to do with him not wanting to draw Superman. He just thought it was silly. Like they're just two different characters. I don't get it.
Have you considered, and I'm not pitching a direct sequel to For All Seasons, especially because the late great Tim Sale is no longer with us, but have you considered a sort of spiritual bookend to it? So we have For All Seasons telling this emotional journey through the beginning seasons of Superman's career. And in my wish list, I sort of always love this idea of taking a similar approach to the final seasons in Superman's career as he's winding down.
I never say never, but whenever I approach a story, whenever an editor or either one of the big two come and say to me, would you like to come back to Superman, for example? They know me well enough to know that the answer is not, do I have a story? The answer is going to be a question, which is, who's going to draw it? It's a little bit like if you're going to do a movie, before you even start it, you go, who's going to star in this? Who's going to direct this? And if you come back to me and say it's going to be James Gunn, I'm writing it all over the place. But if McGuinness said to me tomorrow, let's go back, let's do the S, yeah, I'd be there. There are not a lot of other guys. And I certainly, what you pitched sounds interesting. It's a little Old Man Logan. It's a little, those kinds of stories. The problem I have is that it's not generally what I write about. I tend to write about stories that take place within the stories that you already know.
Mm-hmm.
So you can go and look at, oh, this happened here, and this happened here, and this happened here, without me ever having to deal with continuity, which is, again, my demon. I've told this joke before. This is what I know. Jimmy Olsen never became Robin. Other than that, it's all cream cheese. And when I tell that story where Jimmy Olsen becomes Robin, even if it's just for an hour, in order to help out Batman or whatever silliness I come up with, you will know, man, the fans out there will know, I'm done. This is the last story I will ever tell. have a nice life.
No, fair enough. And with the continuity for all seasons in particular, one of the things I've always admired about it is how it fits so seamlessly between the pages of Man of Steel. And so if you have the Man of Steel miniseries as your definitive origin story, you can read For All Seasons in tandem with it. Yet at the same time, and I would imagine there are probably a lot of people who have come to For All Seasons cold, and maybe they don't have the Man of Steel background. Obviously, it works perfectly well and totally stands on its own. So once again, going back to this idea of a balancing act, I feel it really achieves that. This is minor, but something I've always been curious to ask you. Was it you and or Tim who is an It's a Wonderful Life fan? Because I feel like Pete Ross
Oh
and
no, that's me.
that's you, yeah. Because there's
That's me.
not
No,
only
there's a lot of people. There's a lot of that. All Tim said to me was, I I want to move as far away from Batman as possible. You should remember we did this after the long halloween. You also have to remember we were kids. Like we were still sort of like, oh, we want to Superman? Sure, okay. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know. Well, let's do this. Um, don't you love our voices? But at the end of the day, he said, I want to do Norman Rockwell. And so there's lots of Rockwell references throughout all of it. But yeah, I mean, Frank Capra was my voice inside my head. Uh, for those of you who don't know, he was the director on It's a Wonderful Life. Um, and yeah, hot dog and the I wish I had $1 million and all that stuff is just straight from there. And I like when that stuff happens. I know I'm doing it. I don't pretend to take credit for it. Um, and it always cracks me up when, people say, oh, we ripped off The Godfather in order to do Long Halloween. And I go, I don't think I don't think The Godfather has a superhero running around in it. But are there moments? It starts with, I believe in Gotham City. Godfather starts with, I believe in America. Like, yes, that's a wink.
yeah.
Absolutely.
But as someone who has watched It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas Eve for as long as I can remember, I love it. And I love this idea of Pete Ross as the George Bailey who never made it out of Smallville. I love that. And obviously rubbing the elephant head. But even Martha has a line later on about the right woman can help the right man find the answers he's been looking for. I mean, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I love all of it. When I had Joe Kelly on the show a few months ago, we had a wonderful chat. And I talked to him about how, as the writer of Action Comics, which came last in the monthly release schedule of the titles, he was typically the one tasked with writing the conclusion to all of these big crossover stories. So to wrap us up here, I'll ask you sort of the reverse of that. As the writer of Superman, which came first, you were typically the one kicking off these events. Just curious what that was like. And did it sort of feel like, okay, you were setting it up and letting it go, or not, because you had all worked together to break the story? So it still sort of felt like you had a hand in it.
It was very much us working together. It did tend to be a lot of like Emperor Joker and Our Worlds at War. Those were things that I would come up with and then sort of meet with the gang and talk about it. But I always would run it by Joe first. It's funny that even though Joe Casey and Mark Schultz played in the middle, it's always, and I actually think it's harder playing in the middle because you've got like this bookend at one end and this bookend at the other. I always saw Joe as he wasn't the end of the month. He was the one that came before me. So I would always say to him, listen, you got to clean this up in order for me to get to here, or you got to leave this for me so that I can get to there. I mean, he's one of my closest friends, and we became really close friends from that Superman run. I think he's an amazing writer, and his ideas were always. We got asked to do an interview about Emperor Joker, and we got asked, how did it come from and where was it and all that stuff. And the truth is, neither one of us could remember, because at that point we were so joined at the hip that it would be sort of like, well, what if we did this? What if we did this? And then there were some other things that, I didn't always love, which was like he had come up with this idea that Batman would be screaming every night. And that when he finally found out what he was screaming about, it was because there was crows that were sort of eating away at him the same kind of way of there's a mythical god that has his art torn out every night. Um, and I was like, isn't it much cleaner if he watches his parents die every night? That comes from a real emotional place. I don't believe that there's crows that can tear his heart out and that he wakes up in the morning. Um, but again, you have to, when you're working in a group, you have to respect other people's ideas. I mean, it's certainly something that I learned when I was in television, which is you get 10 people in a room. And the one great thing about working on Smallville that I took with me to every show after that, everything I did at Marvel, all those shows, is I would say, guys, this is day one of episode 6. I want everyone here to tell me their worst idea. And I remember one time we just did Lionel bad ideas. And we were doing like Lionel is a robot, Lionel is a ghost, Lionel is a dog, Lionel is this. And we were just laughing hysterically. And then I would say, okay, now we know what the worst stories are. Everything you say after this point can't be as bad as that. So you don't need to worry about whether or not your idea is a good idea. We've already heard all the bad ideas. And I take that with me with every show. I want to make sure that everyone in the room feels like they can say, what if Lionel was trapped in a building? And have everyone go, oh, that's kind of cool. And it's hard when I was on the Superman books, because it was a lot of the responsibility that DC gave me, which was, you are the first book. We want you to come up with ideas that we've never seen before. And then a lot of times, I think all of us wanted at times to go, do we have to play in everybody's yard? Can we just make sure that I don't kill Lois so that she's not in the next month issue? Like, you get there. I mean, I was there for 3 years. That's a long time in 36 issues or whatever. Plus, there were specials and spinoffs and all kinds of things. Again, I was just lucky that I had Ed with me and that we got to do as many stories as we did. It was a lot of fun.
Well, the last thing I'll say, and then I'll cut you loose, is one of the great joys of doing this podcast for the past 5 years is having the opportunity from time to time to speak with the creators whose work I've enjoyed so much and just express my gratitude. And from reading those issues back when I was 12 to rereading them now as I'm approaching 40, your work, everything that we've talked about here, was so foundational to my fandom and the way I see the character. And it's resonated with me all of these years. So sincerely, I thank you very much for the stories that you and all of your collaborators worked on. And I'm very grateful for your time. This is a huge thing for the podcast. The audience hears me talk about your work all the time. So I'm sure people will be excited to hear from you. And just thank you so, so much.
Again, I'll end this the way I started it, which is it's a partnership. My thing is to say thank you to you. Without people like yourself out there reminding people that, yeah, I worked on Superman for a long time. It enables me to work with that character, to remember that character, to see fans, to see readers that come to conventions, that tell me stories like yours. And again, if I didn't have that kind of support, if I didn't have that army behind me, believe me, it's a corporation. As much as I love them both dearly, they're both corporations. And at the end of the day, they're interested in telling great stories and protecting their characters, but they're also interested in making money. And if your book is not hitting a certain level of sales, you don't get to be on that book anymore. And very shortly after that, you don't get to write for them anymore. And again, I've been extraordinarily lucky that things like For All Seasons is still in print. Like that cracks me up. The Superman books, uh, City of Tomorrow, that gets reprinted around. The one that actually surprised me, which was the one that we had a lot of fun doing. I wish we had gotten to destroy more of the world. Is Our Worlds at War.
Oh, you don't know how happy I was to see that omnibus solicited. I love that
I have
whole
to tell
war
you,
motif. Beautiful.
That book is it amazes me it's still in print. Like when I think and I look at the number of stories that I loved reading and friends that have worked on stuff, and then I go to Amazon to see whether or not there's a collection, there's nothing. And so I know how incredibly fortunate I am that there are people that still want to read Hush, still want to read Long Halloween, still want to read Dark Victory, still want to read For All Seasons. Like it's an honor, and I'm very, very grateful. That's all I can tell you.
I'm trying to manifest a President Luther compendium to fill the gap between the City of Tomorrow compendium and the Our Worlds at War omnibus. So we're trying to put that out there into the universe, but I would love to see it.
At some point, anything can happen. It always amazes me when, I got a hardcover for Wolverine Gambit the other day, and I was like, really? Like, I mean, we sold a lot of copies and all that's great, but like, if this book never reappeared, other than, Timmy's family, I don't know that anybody's going to care. But and people ask me all the time, what's your favorite story? What's your favorite story? What's your favorite character? What's your favorite story? And I have the same answer, and it's probably a good place to wrap up, which is I don't think in terms of stories or characters. When I look at a book, I remember the experience of working with that person. And to me, it's like music. When I hear a song, I remember where I was when I first heard that song, or does that song remind me of somebody? I'm not sitting there going, wow, I love the lyrics. I love the rhythm. I love the sound of the guitar. Yeah, all that's happening, but it is how it affects me on a personal level. And so all of the things that we talked about today, I hope I gave enough credit to the people that I worked with, because it was their moments of everything that I've worked on. It's that kind of thing that gets me excited.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take good care. And if you need anything else, let me know.
My sincere thanks once more to JEPH LOEB and to all of you for listening to this episode. This week, we took a look back at Superman Past. Next week, I'm interviewing current Superman writer Josh Williamson. You don't want to miss it. Until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show too. Thank you. By popular demand, Digging for Kryptonite merch is now available at our TeePublic store. Visit the link in the show notes to get your DFK shirts, hats, mugs, and more. Support the show and receive exclusive content, including the spin-off podcast Beyond Metropolis, by becoming a member at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. My sincere thanks to all patrons. Please subscribe, rate, and review today via your platform of choice, and continue the conversation by joining us on social media. Flat Squirrel Podcast is also home to another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, now covering the color era of the classic George Reeves series. Subscribe today. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Key art by Isaiah Simmons and theme music by Dan Pritchard.